Hello, this is Chris Seals, and I will be walking you through my linear web for my unit plan that is titled Offensive Jesus, or rather, Offensive Jesus. The guiding questions for this unit are: what are the false presuppositions that we hold about Jesus of Nazareth? How did people in first century Palestine respond to Jesus? What elements of Jesus' cultural, religious, and historical climate caused people to respond the way that they did, and what parallels can we draw between first century Palestine and the modern era? So a lot of it is going to be connecting them between historical data that happened in first century Palestine and the modern era, and the Jesus then, and we believe is the same Jesus now, and so how do we interact with this Jesus? To get students to engage in the material, the invitation to learning is called Milk Chocolate Jesus. In this lesson, what we do is, first of all, it starts off with an Edmodo post. Edmodo is an app that all of the students have on their iPads. I guess that's also pertinent information. I teach in a one-to-one school where each student has an iPad. And so at the beginning of every class, typically there is a warm-up of some sort, and this warm-up is my diagnostic assessment to see where they stand, and it's also something that zeroes the students in. So the warm-up for this invitation to learning asks the students 5 adjectives that they would use to describe Jesus. And in this, as they post on Edmodo, all of their classmates' posts are coming up. So those who finish early, I invite them to look at, watch as the other students' posts come in and read the adjectives that their fellow classmates use to describe Jesus. And while all this is coming in, I'm also watching the posts come in live to see what is the general sense, or what are the general thoughts and ideas that the students have regarding Jesus and who he is. After doing this, I then redirect them to a poll, which is also on Edmodo. And the polls are different from the posts because instead of responding in the form of typing a reply, they simply click one of the selections. And the poll asks, how do they feel about chocolate? Do they like it? Do they love it? Do they dislike it? Or are they indifferent toward it? And so in this poll, these results also come up very quickly, but the students' identity is more ambiguous. It doesn't show who posted what. It just gives a number of people in the class. Last time I taught this lesson, about 95% of the students said that they love chocolate. And so it works perfectly in the invitation to learning, because then I introduce them to chocolate, or real chocolate. I first give all of the students a Hershey's Kiss, and then ask them if they like it. Most of them usually say yes, and I explain to them that milk chocolate is usually only about 25% pure chocolate. And then throughout the course of this invitation to learning process, I give them increasing amounts of chocolate, or increasing amounts of cocoa in the chocolate. And so they go to Hershey's Special Dark, which is 45%, to Lindt Special, which is 70%, and then they get another bite of one that's about 80 to 85% chocolate, and by this point most of the students are at the point where they don't like chocolate anymore. And then I take students and I give them a chunk of pure baker's chocolate, which is 100% cocoa, and by that point most of them are asking for a drink of water and asking if they can clean off their tongues because of the bitterness of the taste of the chocolate. And then afterwards I have them resubmit a poll post asking if they like chocolate, pure chocolate, in which case most of the students then say, no, it's disgusting, I don't like it. So this is sort of an entry point to then look into a passage in the book of Luke where the students then get a different side of Jesus, because for the most part, most of their answers tend to be that Jesus is nice, he's kind, he's caring, he's loving, and then so when I introduce them to this Jesus that they'll read in the book of Luke, someone says something about how great it'll be to be in heaven, and then Jesus responds with a parable, essentially saying, you probably won't be there. And Jesus has this way of going against social norms in a way that ends up offending lots of people. And so this is the invitation to learning, getting these students to kind of check their assumptions about who Jesus is and discover a new Jesus, the one that actually seems to be represented in Scripture. For my second lesson, this would be an example of a technology-enhanced lesson. Most of my lessons have this Edmodo element to it, and so in my second lesson, the students are learning about first century Jewish sects and how they responded to Jesus and why Jesus would be offensive to them. Because those of us who are in the modern era might not think Jesus is offensive because he's not part of, he's not responding to our social norms, he's responding to first century Palestinian social norms. And so at first, in the beginning of this class, I do another Edmodo post asking about students' awareness about certain groups like CRI or Zealot or Pharisee or Sadducee. And then after doing an online Edmodo post, I then direct them to the interactive projectors that we have in our classroom. I lead them through a PowerPoint in which there are question and answer sessions where I use the interactive stylus to write on the PowerPoint slides. And then for the second half of the class, we do a role play activity which requires props and things, but in part of the ambiance that is built in the classroom, I use an app called Coffeetivity, which replicates sounds in busy areas like a coffee shop or a marketplace. And so I use the speakers that are mounted in the classroom to play marketplace sounds and have the students reenact what it looks like to be in a first century Palestinian market. And they role play all of these different roles that would have been present in that time. The next couple of lessons that I do in this unit is I then talk to them about Jesus hanging out with sinners and why that was offensive, and then I have them sort of synthesize this learning and apply it to today by saying who were the groups back then and who would they be today, and have them analyze these common familiar elements, and then the students will take a closer look at one of those elements of outcast people, those who were unclean, or people who were ceremonially unclean or sick, and how Jesus even reached out to them even though society didn't want to reach out to them. And then as a part of this lesson, also the touching of the unclean, it's an introduction to writing a really big paper that spans a few different units called an exegesis paper. And then last, the celebration of learning asks the question, who is Jesus today? And in the beginning of the celebration of learning, the students look back at their original Edmodo posts and see what they thought of Jesus, and they compare it to the understanding they have of Jesus now, to monitor their progression, to see how their view of Jesus based on Scripture is beginning to become modified. And after they assess their own growth, I then give them a little bit of direct instruction on the fact that the church, or people who follow Jesus, are meant to be Jesus in the modern world. And so I then give them a good chunk of this last period to work in groups that are differentiated by readiness level, to work in these groups to build a short skit based off of a scenario that I provide them, and ask them to be able to respond to that scenario in the way that Jesus would. So an example of a scenario would be that there is a group of spiritual religious people at school that is making the unreligious people feel bad for not going to church often enough. Who would the groups involved in the situation be, and how would Jesus want to respond in a situation like this? And so by the end of the class, they'll perform these short 1 to 2 minute skits that hopefully demonstrate that they've internalized the concepts from this unit. And then last, this is my reference list. The majority of material that I have for this unit comes from my experience in my undergrad experience. And so as a result, I wasn't able to cite very much of it, but there are a few instrumental books and ideas and interviews. This one interview with my fellow teacher, Wayne Randolph, who teaches at a different school, that really helped influence the way that I would teach these lessons. Thank you.